All right, get ready, because today we're going deep, really deep into everyday English. And trust me, it's a lot more interesting than it sounds. We've got all these different sources, and they touch on some surprising stuff. New Year's resolutions, Christmas traditions, even nail salons, believe it or not.
It's really amazing, how these everyday things, these conversations we have, they tell us so much about American culture. It's like we're getting a peek behind the curtain just by looking at how people use language.
Exactly. And we're going to start with something we've probably all dealt with, New Year's resolutions. One of our sources pointed out that, get this, the most popular resolution is actually to spend more time with family and friends.
Yeah, which sounds, I don't know, sweet, right? But the thing is, the source goes on to say how ironic that is, especially in society that's like always rushing around.
Okay, so let's break this down a bit.
Yeah.
What do you think? Why is this resolution so common, even though everyone's so busy all the time?
Well, the source suggests, I think, part of it is this pressure we feel, to take care of our families,
Yeah.
earning money, getting all the goods and services that come with modern life.
Goods and services. It sounds very official, almost like an economics textbook or something.
Yeah.
But it really just means, like, the stuff we need, the stuff we want in our daily lives.
Exactly. And sometimes I think this focus on, the material stuff, it can overshadow spending quality time with the people we care about. The source even gave this example, people eating while driving, just to show how always on the go we are.
Oh, yeah, I can totally picture that. Someone, like, wolfing down a burger while they're stuck in traffic.
It's become so normal here in America, but I bet in other parts of the world it probably seems pretty weird. Places where meals are more about, like, being social, relaxing, not just, fueling up for the next thing.
That's so true. I've been to countries where mealtime is almost sacred. It's a time to connect with people, not just grab a bite and run.
Exactly. It really shows you how different cultures value different things, how they prioritize their time.
So, going back to those New Year's resolutions, it seems like there's this real struggle, right? Between wanting to be with loved ones and all the demands of modern life.
Absolutely. And the source talked about how people have a hard time actually sticking to their resolutions. Even if they start with good intentions, it's like we set these goals, but then life happens and things get in the way.
Yeah, I think we've all been there. That gym membership you never use, or the language learning app that just sits there on your phone collecting dust. It's so easy to get caught up in the everyday stuff and forget about those bigger goals.
Gathering dust, that's such a great way to put it. It really gives you that sense of like things being neglected, things left unfinished.
Yeah, it does. So maybe the lesson here is that it's not enough to just make a resolution. We got to figure out how to actually make it part of our lives,
Yeah.
make it part of our routine.
I think that's it, yeah. Making a conscious choice, making room for the things that actually matter.
Speaking of making room, let's move on to something that's all about transforming our surroundings, Christmas traditions.
Ah, Christmas. One of our sources really goes all in on the vocabulary and the customs that go with Christmas trees, those classic symbols of the holidays.
And they paint such a vivid picture, don't they? Talking
Yes.
about pine trees, the smell of the needles, all the ornaments and lights, even stockings hanging on the chimney.
But it goes beyond just the tree itself. The source explains how decorating for Christmas becomes this whole house thing, inside, outside, the whole works.
Oh, yeah, for sure. I've seen houses with so many lights, they're practically a landmark. People driving by just to look.
And actually, the source mentioned this movie, National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation. It's hilarious, and it shows this, like, American thing of going totally overboard with Christmas
Oh,
decorations.
yeah, that movie's a classic. Anyone who's ever had to deal with tangled Christmas lights or those inflatable reindeer things can relate to that, for sure.
It's funny, but there's also something interesting about how much of the Christmas experience in America is tied to, like, the senses, what you see, what you smell, all of it.
Absolutely. The source even mentioned how pine-scented cleaning products are popular here because they remind people of Christmas trees.
Isn't that amazing how a smell can bring back such strong memories, emotions? It's like a time machine taking you back to childhood holidays.
It really is like a shortcut to that feeling of warmth, nostalgia, being with family.
And speaking of sensory experiences, let's switch gears again, this time to a place that's all about pampering yourself nail salons.
All right, this is where it gets really interesting. One of our sources gives us this like surprisingly detailed vocabulary list for everything about manicures.
It's a glimpse into this very specific part of American culture, one that's often overlooked, but honestly pretty rich in language and even rituals.
For example, they break down the difference between like a manicure, which is all about the fingernails, and a pedicure, which is for the toes.
And they go even further, explaining what cuticles are. That's the skin around the nail, and what it means to file your nails, to shape them.
They even talked about the smell of nail polish remover, which, let's be honest, can be kind of love it or hate it.
So true. Some people love it, some hate it, but it's definitely a smell you associate with being at the nail salon.
I gotta admit, I'm not the biggest fan of that acetone smell.
Hmm.
It always reminds me of being a teenager, trying out all those different nail polishes.
But for a lot of people, the nail salon is about relaxing. It's about taking care of yourself, getting away from everything for a bit.
Exactly. And the source pointed out how often you hear the phrase, get my nails done, in everyday English. It's become like a regular thing for a lot of women, a way to feel good.
And that word pamper is really key here, I think. It's about treating yourself, a little luxury in your everyday life.
It's interesting how this whole idea of self-care has changed over time. It used to be seen as, like, frivolous or something, but now it's seen as important for your well-being.
It's a total shift in how we think about it. Now it's like taking care of yourself, both physically and mentally. That's essential to living a good life.
And speaking of good experiences, let's move on to a source that takes us into the world of hotels and travel.
Oh, yeah. This one's about a guest who gets a complimentary upgrade, and it uses some essential vocabulary for anyone who's planning a trip.
Yes, they use words like reservation, confirmation number, and of course the dreaded overbooked. Those are words you definitely need to know if you're going to travel anywhere.
The source really focuses on how excited the guest is about the surprise upgrade. He even says, "Woohoo! Presidential suite, baby!" It's clear he's loving this, feeling like a king.
I can practically hear the excitement in his voice. Who wouldn't be thrilled about getting to stay in a fancy suite?
It's like winning the travel lottery, right? But the source also points out that overbooked isn't just a hotel word. It can be used for anything where there are more people than space.
Oh, tell me about it. I've definitely been on trains and buses where it's standing room only. Not fun for a long trip.
But sometimes, even those not-so-great travel situations can lead to, unexpected adventures. Remember that story we heard about the traveler whose bags ended up in Antarctica?
Oh, yeah, that was a good one. It just goes to show, even when travel's chaotic, there's always room for a little humor.
Exactly. And that's what makes learning a language so cool. It's not just about the rules and the words. It's about understanding culture, humor, the whole human experience.
Couldn't have said it better myself. We've covered a lot of ground in this first part of our deep dive. From New Year's resolutions to Christmas to nail salons, it's been quite a journey. But there's so much more to explore. So stick around. We'll be back in a moment to continue our adventure into the world of everyday English.
And as we go through these sources, it's kind of wild how much we can learn about American culture just by, looking at the language, the little everyday interactions.
It's true. It's like we're putting together this puzzle, but instead of pieces, it's conversations.
Exactly. And speaking of conversations, let's go back to that nail salon source for a sec. I thought it was really interesting how they showed the contrast between the woman being super excited about getting her nails done and the man, well, he's not so into it. He even complains about the smell of the nail polish remover, remember?
Oh yeah, that acetone stuff can be pretty intense. I read somewhere that smell is really connected to memory and emotion, so it makes sense that people have such strong reactions to it.
Right. For some people, that smell might bring back good memories, like being with friends or, having some me time. But for others, it could be tied to something not so pleasant.
It's all about those personal connections, I guess. And it kind of ties into the bigger idea of how cultural norms and individual preferences shape our experiences.
Definitely. What seems normal in one culture could be totally strange in another. And that's what makes learning a language so cool. It's not just about the words themselves. It's about understanding, the whole context they're used in.
So true. Okay, speaking of context, let's shift gears to a source that takes us into the world of hotels and travel. I was really intrigued by that story about the guest who gets a free upgrade to the presidential suite.
Oh, yeah, that was a classic. It was like a mini movie, All that suspense, the confusion, and then bam, he's super happy.
And they did a really good job of slipping in some key travel vocabulary along the way, like reservation, confirmation number,
Yeah.
and of course, the dreaded overbooked. You got to know those words if you're traveling.
For sure. And they explained those words in a way that's easy to understand, but also fun to read. They didn't just define them. They showed you how they're used in real situations.
Exactly. I think that's a really important part of learning a language. Right?
Yeah.
You can't just memorize lists of words. You got to see how those words work in conversations in the real world.
Couldn't agree more. And that story in particular, it shows how language can be used to create humor,
Hmm.
and build suspense. The guest being all confused at first, and then his reaction when he finds out about the upgrade, it's just really entertaining.
It's a roller coaster of emotions, and it reminds you that even when travel throws you a curveball, there's always room for a laugh, for something unexpected.
Speaking of unexpected, I gotta admit, I laughed out loud when he said, "Woohoo! Presidential suite, baby!" It's
Yeah.
just so spontaneous, so genuine.
It really is. You can totally hear the excitement in his voice, like he won the lottery or something.
It makes you think sometimes a little luck and a positive attitude can lead to some pretty awesome experiences.
Absolutely. Which brings us to another important point, attitude. Whether you're dealing with a travel mess or just everyday life, having a positive outlook can make a huge difference.
That's a good point. It's about focusing on the good stuff, even when things don't go exactly how you planned.
Well said. So let's switch our focus now to another fascinating aspect of language,
Mm.
how it reflects cultural values and beliefs.
Good segue. One of our sources talks about how America really emphasizes self-reliance and individualism, and they compare that to more collectivist cultures where the group's needs are more important than individual desires.
This is where it gets really interesting, I think. It's like we're going deeper, looking at the values that shape a culture's language and how people act.
Exactly. And the source gives some great examples of how these cultural differences show up in everyday language. For example, they talk about how Americans tend to be more direct in how they communicate, while people from collectivist cultures might be more indirect or like subtle.
That's so true. It's not just about the words themselves. It's about how they convey meaning,
Yeah,
the nuances.
exactly. And understanding those cultural differences is super important if you want to communicate effectively across cultures. You got to be sensitive to different communication styles and realize that what's polite in one culture might be rude in another.
It's all about cultural awareness, being able to adapt. And that's a skill that's really useful, especially in today's world where everything's so connected.
Absolutely. And speaking of being connected, let's look at a source that talks about the impact of globalization on language.
This is a super relevant topic these days, right? With technology and travel making the world smaller and smaller. One of our sources talks about English becoming this global language, a way for people from all different backgrounds to communicate.
It's interesting to think about what that means. On one hand, it opens up all these possibilities for people to connect and work together. But on the other hand, there's the worry about losing linguistic diversity, about one language becoming too dominant.
It's a complicated issue, for sure, but it's definitely worth talking about and thinking about how language shapes our view of the world, our place in it.
Couldn't agree more. Language is powerful, and it's up to us to use it in a way that's thoughtful and, responsible.
Well said. We've covered a ton in this second part of our deep dive. From those subtle cultural differences in communication to the global impact of language, it's been a fascinating journey. But there's still more to explore, so stay tuned. We'll be back in a moment to wrap up our adventure into the world of everyday English. Okay, we're back and ready to wrap up this deep dive into the world of everyday English. It's amazing what you can learn about a culture just by paying attention to how they speak.
Seriously, it's like we went on this whole adventure through New Year's resolutions, nail salons, even those unexpected travel upgrades. Who knew language could be